Well, hello everyone. My name's Sharon Spencer with IAAP, and I want to welcome you all to Using Assistive Technology in Accessibility Testing. Before we get started, I just want to quickly review a few system items. Everyone is hopefully logged into Adobe Connect, or you can follow along with the handout and over the phone. To download the handouts, there was a link in the confirmation email that you received when you registered or in the reminder email that was sent out a few days ago. During today's webinar, if you do want to ask questions, our speaker Kathy Walden does plan to stop for questions throughout and at the end. If you have a question, you can type it into Adobe Connect. If you look at your screen on the right-hand side, you'll see the chat area. There's a text box at the bottom of the chat area. Just type in your question or your comment and hit enter or click on that send icon. And then Kathy will address your question when she gets to a good stopping point. And to guard against background noise, I have put those of you who are on the phone on mute. But at the end of the webinar, if you have a question you want to ask over the phone, you can press #6 to unmute your phone line, and then *6 put your phone back on mute. And also at the end, if you're connected via voice over IP, if you want to put a message in the chat area and to have us unmute your microphone, we can do that. For those of you who are connected over the phone, you may be hearing double audio. If you are hearing double audio, you can mute your computer speakers, but you will need to remember to unmute them when Kathy plays her videos. The other option would be you can simply hang up the phone and just listen via voice over IP only. In order to see the PowerPoint presentation, you can zoom in using the full screen icon. That's mode, and then also click on it to get out. You'll need to get out of full screen mode in order to see the chat area. And if you're not seeing that icon, if you're seeing 4 lines in the top right-hand corner, those are your options, and full screen will be listed there. And then lastly, I want to remind everybody that we will be recording this webinar. So again, I want to thank you all for joining us today for using assistive technology in accessibility testing. Our speaker is Kathy Walden. Kathy is the CEO and founder of Interactive Accessibility. Kathy has been very active in the web accessibility community since 2001, and her company helps organizations understand accessibility laws and guidelines, assess their level of accessibility, and achieve compliance. Kathy is also an invited expert of the W3C WCAG 2.0 Working Group and the WCAG 2.0 Evaluation Methodology Task Force. She leads the Boston Accessibility Group and is chair of the IAAP Individual Professional Development Committee. And Kathy also is an instructor for classes on universal design at the University of Colorado at Boulder. So we're delighted to have Kathy with us as today's speaker. So Kathy, thank you for doing this for us, and I'll turn things over to you.
Great. Thanks, everybody. It's wonderful being here. So today's topic is using assistive technology in accessibility testing, which is a really big topic. This is a class for beginners. So if you already know how to use assistive technology, you'll probably hear some things you already know. But we have geared this towards highlighting some of the basics about assistive technology, what it is, how it works. We won't have time to go in depth into all the details about assistive technology, but at the end of my slides, I do have a download to some checklists and some other details that will be helpful in taking you further to the next steps. Also, I did want to mention today that we have, for the assistive technology demos, I have recorded them and I will be playing back videos of it. I had a problem when I was trying to test, trying to use JAWS and Zoom Text and Dragon Naturally Speaking, and I ended up keep crashing Acrobat Connect. So to make sure that we don't have those problems today, I recorded those videos. So if you are on a slow connection and you're not seeing the video or the video is not coming through, properly, it may be better just to watch the recording. And as Sharon pointed out, we will have that available to everyone to go back and watch. So if you're having problems on the first video, most likely you're going to have problems on the other videos. There's actually 3 of them that we'll be watching today. So the purpose of today is to learn how users with disabilities access the web, understand the tools that they use and how it works with digital media, and learn what you can do and how you can use assistive technology to really improve your digital products. So to begin with, let's just talk about what is digital accessibility. Well, digital accessibility ensures that all audiences can use digital communications to find information and interact with content. That's really the purpose of the World Wide Web. And what we want to make sure is that everyone can access it. So if I'm a person with a disability who may be blind or have low vision, someone who's deaf or hard of hearing, somebody with mobility impairments or cognitive impairments, we want to make sure that our products, our documents, our videos, our mobile applications, our websites, whatever we're communicating digitally can be used by users with disabilities using the tools that they're using to access the computer. So an assistive technology is any device or method that helps a person with a disability function more effectively in daily life. So for example, a user who is blind will be using a product called a screen reader. And we'll be talking more about screen readers later in this webinar. The ultimate goal is to make sure that the products work for people with disabilities. And that's really why we have the accessibility guidelines. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG 2.0, really focuses on user needs, and it's independent of technology. So no matter what technology you're using, whether you've got a website, a document, a mobile application, the WCAG 2.0 guidelines provide information on how to meet the needs of people with disabilities. Specifically, it details how to make text readable and understandable, how to make content appear and operate in predictable ways. It helps users avoid and correct mistakes. It gives users enough time to read and use content. It helps users navigate and find content, and it makes all functionality available from a keyboard. And if you drill down further into the accessibility guidelines, it'll provide more details on the things that we need to do to make sure that our system will be usable for people with disabilities. So these are the principles and the guidelines that we should be following to help understand what we need to do to make our products accessible for people with disabilities. So what does it really mean to be accessible? Well, it means that it works with the tools and the assistive technology that people with disabilities use. When we're testing a product, most likely your test plans include testing with multiple browsers, Internet Explorer, Chrome, Firefox, Safari, on multiple platforms. You don't launch a product and just launch it with only testing in one browser and one combination, but you're going to be testing in a multiple of different ones. And it's no different. The tools and assistive technology that people with disabilities use are simply looking at the underlying code and making an alternate version for that user. And so we want to make sure that people with disabilities can interact with our products using those tools. And it's not just compliance with the guidelines and standards. The guidelines will provide information about what we need to do and how we need to do it, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be fully compliant with all of the different combinations that our users may be using. And that's why we have testing with assistive technology. All right, so I want to just do a quick poll. The poll question is here. And the question is, what assistive technology needs need to be supported? So as we're looking at our products, what do we need to do? And if you guys, if you can go up there, there's radio buttons. If you could make your selection. The options are all assistive technology, some assistive technology, at least one assistive technology for each type of disability. You don't know? None of the above. All right, so we have a lot of people saying all assistive technology, some saying some assistive technology, at least one assistive technology for each type, and a few people say none of the above. So really, when we're looking at this, it's kind of a trick question because there's no one that says what we need to test or how much testing is actually enough. When we look at the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and we look at their definition of accessibility support, they do not specify how much or how many or which assistive technology must be supported to be accessibility supported. Accessibility support means under the W3C Web Content Accessibility Guidelines that content is defined in a way that makes it possible for assistive technology and user agents to successfully present the content information to the user. The assistive technology and user agents can understand and use the information. And so when we're looking at the assistive technology, there's a number of things that we need to consider in determining what we're going to test with. But the other side of using assistive technology is not only verifying that it's going to work for our end users, but you can also use assistive technology to verify that we're meeting the WCAG guidelines that have been detailed out. So for example, checking dynamic content is something that is often very difficult to determine whether or not it's going to work with a screen reader. So the easiest way to test dynamic content to see if it's actually going to work and it's going to be apparent to a person who doesn't see the screen is to test with the screen reader. And if that text is easily found or it speaks automatically by the screen reader, we know that the screen reader users are going to be able to get that information. So we all understand that it's important to follow the WCAG guidelines because that's going to tell us what we need to do. And we know it's good to test with assistive technology. But as you are all thinking about your timelines and how much testing that could mean and what that could mean to your quality assurance plans, you're probably thinking, oh my, look at the different combinations. Okay, I've got 3 operating systems, I got multiple devices, I got multiple browsers, and I got assistive technology on top of that. And if I put that all into a matrix, we really have a huge number of combinations that we possibly might need to test with. So some factors that you should look at when determining what to support is to really analyze and understand your product to begin with. Understand what platforms are supported. Maybe your system only works in Internet Explorer. Maybe it's only in Chrome, and you'll want to take a look at that and factor it in as far as the support that you will need to have for assistive technology users. If you are supporting new technology or you've got new frameworks, some of the older assistive technology and the older browsers may not work. You may no longer be supporting IE8. Maybe you're on IE9 or 10 and above. You also want to look at just what assistive technology you're looking at. Most of the time, support for a single assistive technology is insufficient. Other times we might look at some assistive technology and the overall support will be poor. So we really need to look at, who are we designing this system for, who are our end users, what should we test, and what versions and combinations should we look at. So when you're creating this matrix, you'll want to look at who's my target audience. You'll want to consider support for free or low-cost versions. When we're looking at assistive technology on the PC and we're looking at it on mobile and we're looking at it on the Mac, there's some assistive technology that's built right into the operating system. And so those are readily available. We'll want to make sure that those platforms and software programs are supported. We'll also want to look at free and open source products such as NVDA, which is a free screen reader that's available on the PC. You'll also want to focus on the most popular and most frequently used combinations. WebAIM puts out a really great survey every year that details out the number of people who are using different assistive technology, and you can see what are the most popular, what's the most frequently used combinations. Now that survey is geared towards the U.S., and so that is very geared to what's used here in the United States. If you're in another country, you'll want to look at what assistive technology makes sense for where you live and what the audience is that you are going to support. And the assistive technology does differ in the different countries and the different locations. You'll also want to look at where similar combinations will provide similar results. So if I know if I test with one screen reader in this and another screen reader in this, I'm going to get similar results, then I know I don't have to test in all of those different combinations. I may just want to test in one of them and then make the assumption that it will work in those other combinations. All right, so another poll. Let's go to this one. And the question is, true or false? Using JAWS 15 with a product will work the same in Internet Explorer and in Firefox. And JAWS, for those of you who don't know what JAWS is the leading screen reader that has been used in many countries, but it is the most popular screen reader here in the United States. All right, so most of you have, or all of you have said false, and you're right. Looking at the different browsers, you will get different results with the screen reader. And the reason for that is that the browsers have different accessibility APIs that it's communicating information to with the assistive technology. And it may require different techniques for accessing the browser's API or DOM. And so especially when we're looking at ARIA support, ARIA is interpreted by the browser to the accessibility APIs, and so we see a greater difference in the level of support across the different browsers and how it is interpreting it. Some of the APIs that are available, so in Internet Explorer we're looking at MSAA and UIA. We've got Firefox, MSAA, and iAccessible 2. Chrome is the same, MSAA and iAccessible 2. On the Mac, we've got different, and on Linux. So we've got a number of different APIs that we are looking at as far as how the screen reader is getting information. The screen readers also sometimes query the DOM and get information on their own. So really when we're looking at the behavior between the different browsers and the different assistive technology, that can be different. And one thing that I get questions all the time with people who are starting to test with the assistive technology is, well, I'm testing in Internet Explorer and I'm testing in Firefox, but I get all the information, but JAWS is just speaking in it a different way. It's not exactly the same. How can I get it to speak exactly the same way? And the answer is you can't. The assistive technology is going to speak things differently in different browsers, and that's okay. We just want to make sure all the pertinent information is communicated. The other thing to keep in mind is that it's not just your responsibility. If you're coding this and doing this, there's only a limited amount that you are actually in control of. If there's a problem in a user agent, a browser, if there's a problem in the assistive technology, then those are things that you should support to the makers of that technology, because they may or may not be things that you can actually fix in your system, in your product. All right, so let's go ahead and start talking about just how to test. The first thing that we need to do and understand is what are the tools that people with disabilities are using? How are they using these tools, and how can we use them for testing? What are some strategies that we can use for testing? And then very briefly, I'm going to talk about just the testing checklist, which include both the different procedures on how to test with the assistive technology. So the things that we'll be going over today are actually available in written format as well as a checklist, so you're welcome to download those. All right, so users who are blind are going to be using a screen reader. A screen reader is simply a tool that reads the underlying code and produces an auditory version of the content that's on the screen. The browsers interpret the underlying code and produce a visual view for those users who can see the screen. The screen reader simply does the same thing, but it produces it in an alternate format, in this case, an auditory experience. It is available both on the PC and on the Mac, and some users will also use a refreshable Braille device. The refreshable Braille device produces the same information that is spoken in the auditory version in Braille, and so users who use a Braille device can actually read it using their Braille display, and it refreshes as the content is speaking. When you're looking at testing with the screen readers, you'll always want to test with the default settings. We don't want to assume that a user with a disability is going to be changing the settings. There are different ways of saying, I want to read things a little bit differently or change the way things are, and unless our product is going to specifically specify those things that need to be changed, we should be testing with the default settings. Always start testing with the latest version. Older versions of the assistive technology may have bugs, and different versions may produce different results. And so when you're looking at and testing with the assistive technology, what we're trying to find are issues within the product, not issues within the assistive technology. So if we're testing first with the latest version, we're most likely going to find less issues that are related to the actual assistive technology. The other thing to keep in mind is that we should be interacting with the screen reader using the keyboard. Don't use your mouse. A user who is blind or visually impaired is not going to necessarily be using the mouse because it may be hard or impossible to see that mouse cursor. Another little tip that you should do is start the assistive technology before you start your browser. In older versions of the screen readers and older versions of the browsers, this used to be a really important thing. Now I find that even though things have improved greatly and you shouldn't have to start the screen reader before the browser, I find I have less issues with the assistive technology if I have it running prior to starting the browser. The other thing to keep in mind is that you will want to test in multiple browsers because you may get different results. And so when you're looking at testing in the different combinations, you're going to want to look at those platforms that have good support. You'll notice that Chrome is not on this list, except for Chrome on the Android platform. Chrome overall, while the support has been increasing, it doesn't have full support. And so a lot of the times when you're testing your product in Chrome, you're going to hit issues that are problems in Chrome and not problems with your product. All right, so I'm going to switch over to our first video. And as I do that, I'm just going to get that switched over. The basics in testing with a screen reader are first to listen with the page and then interact with the page and check navigation methods. And so when we're looking at screen reader testing, those are the three basic things. But when you're testing, it's going to depend on your actual system that you're testing, what types of functions there are, what types of technologies you have. So today what I'd like to do is just talk about the different basics of starting to use a screen reader, but there's so much more that you could go. But the best thing that you can do is get in there, start practicing with the screen reader, and get to learn how things are being announced. So as we go through this video, listen to the screen reader. Notice the things that are being announced, things that are not being announced. Today we are using the before and after demo that is part of the Web Accessibility Initiative, and if you haven't seen that, that is an excellent place to get started. So I'm going to go ahead and start this video.
This is a demo of how to use JAWS in accessibility testing. The JAWS screen reader is similar to other screen readers, so even though we focus on JAWS today, the things that we're talking about can be applied when using other screen readers. For this demo, we will be using the latest public release version 15 of the JAWS software. JAWS is a screen reader that is developed by Freedom Scientific. When you're just getting started with a screen reader, it's important to learn what the typical behavior is within the screen reader and what is not typical and may be an issue with the product, application, or website that you're testing. Many people testing with screen readers will often experience issues that are not really issues with the website or the application, but are issues from not knowing how to use a screen reader. Also keep in mind that if you're a visual user, your view of the site is already different from that of a user who has a visual impairment because you have a visual or a mental view of the site. The first thing that you'll want to do when testing with a screen reader is to listen to the page. Sometimes it's useful to do this with the monitor turned off or with a piece of paper over your screen so that you're not biased by the visual view of what is seen on the screen. You'll want to listen for things that are confusing. For example, if an image doesn't have a text alternative, the screen reader may read the file name. Sometimes ASCII characters will get read, or content will be read out of order and won't make sense at all. When the screen reader is turned on, it's important to follow along on the screen.
For those of us on
and
the
notice
phone, we're not hearing anything.
that is
Is
read
something
that
going on?
shouldn't be read, or things that are read that are hidden on the page. This hidden content will sometimes be read.
All right, I just actually paused the video, so you guys aren't actually hearing the audio. It should
No.
be coming through on the computer, so it's
Kathy,
not part.
yes, I was just going to jump in and say, if they're not hearing the audio, you probably have muted your computer, the speakers on your computer. So you want to unmute those so that you can hear the video. The audio for the video, as Kathy was about to say, comes through your computer.
So if
And
you're
then
calling, you're not hearing it.
Well, no, if you're calling in, are you also logged into Adobe Connect?
No.
Okay. Yes, then if you're calling, no, you should actually be hearing it over the phone if you're only connected via the phone. It should be coming in.
I'm muting my phone though, Sharon, when I do it, so it's not coming through mine.
No, it wouldn't come through yours. The system knows that someone is connected manually to the phone, and it sends the audio to their phone line. So I don't know why. Okay, Juan is saying that he's using the phone, but it's coming through very low. Juan, in that case, there should be a way for you to increase the audio on your phone.
And I'm listening to it on this phone too. It's Pina, I'm not hearing it at all.
Yeah, Pina, I don't know why that would be, because the system should be sending the audio to the phone. Could you log into Adobe Connect and just use that for the audio for the videos? Same thing, David, I see you've got the same issue. Pina, is that something that you can do? And David, same for you. If you guys can do that, let's pause for a minute, Kathy, and just see if we can get everybody logged in.
I think you should just keep going because otherwise you'll run out of time for the rest of the class. We're just going to play with it.
Okay, if you can't log in, then we will, you'll have the recording, and the recording should have the audio, so you'll be able to listen to the recording.
Yeah, so maybe, Kathy, when you finish playing it, you can just recap very briefly so we can follow the rest of the session.
Sure. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, Kath, thanks.
And sometimes it provides additional context for screen reader users, which is good. And other times it's content that really should be hidden from all users. You also want to check to make sure that items on the page get read in a logical order. And we'll now demo this in JAWS. The screen reader speech rate can be increased or decreased using Alt, Control, Page Up, and Page Down. It's also important to know that the screen reader has different modes. When you get to a page and you're reading the text, you're in reading mode. When you're in reading mode, you can move from content type to content type or from sentence or line to line using the arrow keys. Sometimes it's easier for users to listen to a page by different components by using the arrow keys rather than listening to the page from top to bottom. That way you can go through at your own pace. All right, so let's go ahead and turn on the screen reader. Pay attention to what the screen reader is reading on the page and what other things it's also announcing.
Welcome to City Lights. Left bracket accessible home page, right bracket overview visited link. Page has 9 headings and 55 links. Welcome to City Lights. Left bracket accessible home page, right bracket. Same page link, skip to accessible demo page link, graphic W3C logo. Visited link, graphic web accessibility initiative, left parent Y, right parent logo. Heading level 1 accessible home page dash before and after demonstration improving a website using web content accessibility guidelines, left parent WCAG, right parent 2.0 list of 6 items, bullet visited link overview, bullet current location colon home list of 2 items, nesting level 1 bullet inaccessible colon visited link inaccessible home page link inaccessible home page report bullet accessible colon accessible home page link accessible home page report list end nesting level 1 link show annotation bullet link news bullet visited link tickets bullet visited link survey bullet link template list end demo starts here list of 2 items bullet same left parent within.
All right, so to stop this speech, all I do is press the control key and that'll stop JAWS from reading the rest of the page. Now if I wanted to continue JAWS to reading, I can press insert down arrow. Now I'm going to, instead of letting JAWS just continue reading, I'm going to actually use the arrow key. So I'm going to press the down arrow key, and I'm just going to walk through a couple of the different elements on this page.
List end. Graphic city lights colon your access to the city. Graphic sunny spells. Explore site by topic colon. Combo box quick menu. Go button. Blank. Traffic colon construction work on main road. Blank. Today colon Thursday 18 September 2014. Sunny spells 23 degrees C. Blank. Heading level 2 navigation menu colon. List of 4 items. Bullet home. Bullet link news. Bullet visited link tickets. Bullet visited link survey.
All right, so as we read through, did you notice that when the page first started, that the screen reader announced the title of the page, but it also announced the number of headings and the number of links. That provides the screen reader context as to what's on this page, how big it is, and gives some idea to the screen reader as to what they're going to encounter. Next, the screen reader read the page title, the logo, and each of the different tabs. As it read the tabs, did you notice that it announced them as a list and told the user how many items were in that list? There's also special function keys in the screen reader that allows a user to skip from list to list or list item to list item. When we encountered other items, the screen reader would announce it as a graphic or as a select menu or a button or a list. So the screen reader will announce not only the content that's on there, the text that's on the page or the text that's in the image, but it also announces the types of elements that are on the page. This page that we just listened to was the accessible version of the home page. I'm now going to switch over to the inaccessible version and let you listen to the page without some of the appropriate semantic markup.
Welcome to City Lights, left bracket inaccessible home page, right bracket. Welcome to City Lights, left bracket inaccessible tab. Skip to inaccessible demo, enter. Welcome to City Lights, left bracket blank, blank. Visited link graphic red dot with a white letter C that symbolizes a moon crescent as well as the sun. This logo is followed by a black banner that says City Light Switch. Is the name of this online portal. Find a slight slant across the top banner. Combo box quick menu dash 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 greater. Traffic: construction work on main road today: Thursday 18 September 2014. Sunny 23 degrees C. Blank. Link graphic /nav underline home on mouse over. Link graphic /nav underline news on mouse over. Link graphic /nav underline facts on mouse over. Link graphic /nav underline survey on mouse over. Blank. Welcome to City Lights. Blank. City Lights is the new portal for visitors and residents. Find out what's on, book tickets, and get the latest news.
The logo City Lights, your access to the city, was very verbose. It described how the different colors, the different ways that it was looking. It really described the image, where really the only thing that was important is the fact that this is city lights and the text, your access to the city. So really, when we looked at the accessible version, the short text alternative for this image was much more appropriate. Also, when we read the quick menu in this time, we had a lot of ASCII characters that got read. The screen reader will read dashes and greater than signs, and it'll read it as that because that's what it is. Also, did you notice that when we got to the main navigation area, the home, news, tickets, and survey, the screen reader didn't read that as home link or news link. It read it as the file name of that image. So very quickly, when reading with the screen reader, we identified some issues that are within the page. Another thing that we should keep in mind when we're reading the page is to make sure that the visual information that is conveyed is also conveyed to a screen reader if it's important to understand the content. So now that we've listened to the page with the screen reader and we've identified some issues with the content, the next step is to interact with the page. The main keyboard commands to move through the content is to use the tab key. The tab key will move you from link to link or button to button, really any active element on the page. Shift tab will move you backwards through all the active elements on the page. Enter key will activate a link or a button. A space bar will activate a button. If you happen to press the space bar on an item that is a link, it's going to scroll your page. The arrow keys can be used to move between radio buttons or to select an item on a select menu. Often, user interface controls such as menus, tab controls, sliders, and a lot of other controls will now use the arrow keys as well to move between the different items in a group. Another important thing to note is that you may get different results when using the screen reader and when it's turned off. So if I have the screen reader off and I'm tabbing through the page, I may not see any issues, but I may see an issue when the screen reader is turned on. So it's always important to test with the screen reader on with the keyboard. Also, keep in mind when you're using a screen reader that often a screen reader user will not be using the mouse. If you use the mouse with the screen reader, sometimes you will get unpredictable behavior. So put your mouse aside and just use the keyboard. You may also get different results when testing with the keyboard and the screen reader when you're in different browsers. JAWS does behave differently in Internet Explorer and in Firefox, so it's important to test in both browsers. Okay, so let's use the same site using the screen reader in Internet Explorer. I'll use the tab key to move around the page. The arrow keys will be used to move between the different radio buttons. Pay attention to the controls. Make sure that the control is announced with the appropriate information. Every control should have a name. So for example, if there is a continue button on the screen, it should be announced as a button with the name continue. Similarly, all of the form controls, all of the different buttons, the links, they all should be announced with some sort of text and not just announced as a link or a button. If there is no text associated with it or the appropriate properties such as the radio button selected or not selected, then a screen reader user will not have all the information to understand that type of control. So right now we're going to go to the survey page on the before and after demonstration. And when I get there, I'm going to go and interact through the page using the keyboard. I'm going to start by just pressing the tab key and interacting with the different items on the page. When I get to a radio button, I will be using the arrow keys.
Welcome to City Lights, left bracket inaccessible survey page, right. City Lights survey, left bracket accessible survey page, right. Tab, skip to accessible demo page, same page, enter. Demo starts here. Page has 5 headings and 46 links. Demo starts here. List of 2 items, bullet, same page, link, skip the content, left parent within demo page, tab, skip the navigation, left parent within tab, City Lights, your access to the city, visited link graphic, tab, explore site by topic, combo box. Quick menu. To change the selection, use the arrow keys. Broadcasting, education, electricity, fire service. Tab, go button. Tab, home visited link. Tab, news link. Tab, tickets visited link. Tab, favorite park, none, radio button not checked. Space, favorite park, none, radio button checked. To change the selection, press up or down arrow. Favorite park, Central Park, radio button checked. To change the selection, press up or down arrow. Tab, greenest city, cities of the world, combo box. Select a city from this list. To change the selection, use the arrow keys. Abu Dhabi in Abuja, Nigeria, left parent A, right parent. Tab, free newsletter, left parent optional, right parent Mr. Radio button not checked title. To change the selection, press up or down arrow. Free newsletter, left parent optional, right parent Mrs. Radio button check title. To change the select tab. Free newsletter, left parent optional, right parent name, edit. Type in text. Kathy. Tab. Free newsletter, left parent optional, right parent email address, edit. KATHY@IA1YCOM. Tab. Free news KATHY@IA1YCOM. Tab, submit button.
Okay, so as I interacted with that page, the screen reader told me what the different types of controls were. It announced what names were of the controls. It told me the different states. For example, it told me when the radio button was selected or when it wasn't selected. Also, it gave me instructions about how to interact with the different controls. One of the things that you'll want to pay attention to when you're interacting with the page is that the items get keyboard access in a logical order, so it's not jumping around the page. So the visual order pretty much matches what the tab order is. I also want to make sure that all of the controls can be interacted with this keyboard. So for example, I could select a radio button using the spacebar key. One of the things to note when using a screen reader is that you have different modes. When we were on the first page and we were reading the page, we were in reading mode. When we get to a form and we need to interact with the page, we go into forms mode. Forms mode allows the browser to capture the keyboard strokes instead of passing them to the screen reader. This allows you to interact with the page. It also allows you to type information. If the information got passed to the screen reader and didn't go to the browser, then there would be no way to enter in, for example, my name into the name field. Another thing that you'll want to watch out for when you're testing with the keyboard is that you don't get any automatic changes of context. A user should always be in control of where the focus is on the page, and it should not automatically change. Sometimes when you're looking at a page and it's not very accessible, The focus may change automatically, may reset to the top of the page, which means you've got to navigate from the top back to where you were. Or sometimes it automatically changes focus when you do a selection in a text box, for example. The next thing we'll want to look at is navigation methods. A screen reader user should be able to get to the different sections of the page without having to read from the top to the bottom. Visual users can easily scan a page by looking at the different headings, the different visual selections, and if a page is structured correctly with the right HTML elements, such as headings or landmarks, a screen reader user can also jump to the different sections of the page. There are function keys in the screen reader that allow you to easily navigate by heading. For example, in JAWS, you can press the H key to jump from heading to heading, or you can use the 1 through 6 to jump to specific heading levels. You can also pull up a headings list on the page, which will list all of the headings using Insert F6. While you can check this using other methods, and in fact, a lot of the things we've talked about today can be tested using different faveletes or toolbars or by looking at the underlying code, it's often helpful to use this in a screen reader because you can quickly identify issues. The headings should be in a logical order, but keep in mind that they don't need to be in a sequential order. For example, you don't have to have an H1 followed by an H2. You could have an H1 followed by an H3. This is not an issue. The relationship, the parent-child relationship between the headings will be known. Okay, so let's look at this with the screen reader. On this page, we know that there's several big, bold headings. Visually, if I scan the page, I know that their primary heading is City Lights Survey. Then there's another heading that says This Week's Survey, More Cities in the Park, a Pain or Gain. I also see that there's another heading lower in the page that's Last Week's Survey Results. So let's go ahead and see if we can navigate by the different headings. I'm going to press the H key on the keyboard.
Last week's survey results heading level 2.
All right, so I was on the submit button. I pressed the H key and we jumped down to last week's survey results. If I continue to press the H key, if that's the last heading on the page, it will wrap up to the top and cycle through the different headings on the page.
Wrapping the top accessible survey page dash before and after demonstration heading level 1. Navigation menu : heading level 2. City Lights Survey heading level 1. This week's survey : more city parks dash a pain or a gain heading level 2. Last week's survey results heading level 2.
Okay, so I just cycled through all of the headings on the page. And just like a visual user who's seeing the different headings because they're big and they're bold, a screen reader user could also cycle through those same headings on the page because they were defined as headings in the underlying code. I'm now going to press Insert F6 to show a list of all the headings on the page.
Heading list dialog. Headings list view. Navigation menu : 2 of 5. To move to items, use the arrow keys.
All right, so this is the list, headings list, and it shows all of the headings on the page. It does list the headings in the order in which they appear on the page. So the first heading on the page is the accessible survey page, before and after demonstration. In the list, there is a number next to each of the headings, and that refers to the heading level. You can sort these in tab order or alphabetically. You can also press the first letter of the heading. If you know, for example, I want to get to last week's survey, I can press the L key.
L, last week's survey results : 2.
And it'll take me directly to the first heading in the list that starts with L. And if I want to move to that heading, I can simply go to the button that says Move to Heading, and it'll jump me directly to that spot on the page.
Tab, move to heading button to add enter. Heading level 2, last week's survey results. Last week's survey results heading level 2. Blank, table with 7 columns and 3 rows. What is your favorite and least favorite organ?
Okay, so I jumped directly to last week's survey results. So that's the basics of using a screen reader.
All right. So for those of you who missed that video, I apologize. We will have it recorded, but just to kind of summarize what we just listened to was when we're testing with the screen reader, the most important thing is to interact with the screen reader in a way that a person with a disability is going to interact with it. And that means we're going to listen to the page. You're going to want to try and see what things, what is being read, what's not being read. Is there things that are being missed? For example, if we saw an image that didn't have a text alternative and the file name was read, and so you really missed the information that was there, and it didn't have a good text alternative. We also heard where the text alternative was very verbose and it didn't make sense and it wasn't accurate with what was seen on the screen. You'll also want to interact with the page. The screen reader will read and tell you what types of controls they are. It'll tell you what's a button, what's a radio button. It'll also tell you the different states. And so it's important to start learning how the screen reader announces those different things so that you know when there's an issue on the page. The screen reader should provide all of the information that is visually seen on the page. So for example, if we have something selected and it is indicated by color or by a different text format, that information is also communicated in an auditory way as well, so that the screen reader users will not miss that content. So when we're interacting with the page, we're looking at the different types of controls, making sure that we can use them with the keyboard. And then we also want to check the different navigation methods, making sure that the different function keys that you can use within the screen reader's work, that you can navigate by the different elements on the page. And as Anne put a comment in the chat, she said, I'm disappointed that the way ARIA landmarks are not included in this demo. And I agree. Way ARIA landmarks are something that is very useful for screen reader users to navigate and interact. So often one of the things that you're doing when you're testing the different navigation methods is to make sure that we can easily navigate through all of the landmarks and that those landmarks are clearly defined. So for example, if I have multiple navigation landmarks on the page, I want to make sure that I can tell the difference between those and that the navigation elements are then labeled. So I know that this is main content versus some other main navigation versus some other navigation. Some tips in just when using a screen reader. There are bugs within the screen reader, and sometimes when you do it, you'll get the message, this feature is only available in a virtual document. That is because usually we have a problem with the virtual buffer, and you can hit Insert Escape to fix that issue. Sometimes also when you're tabbing through the different elements, it's going to say the same thing over and over and over again. Or when you press the H key, for example, it's just going to echo the H key. It's not going to actually move from heading to heading. These are problems with the screen reader. And if you do have this erratic behavior, the best thing that you can do is to either tab to a different application and go back to the browser, or shut down the browser and start it over again, and that sometimes will fix the way that the screen reader is reading. All right, so let's talk a little bit about users who have low vision. Users who've got low vision may use a number of different tools and browser functions to magnify the screen. So we have browser functions which will allow us to increase and decrease the zoom settings and the text sizes. They may also use alternate style sheets to make the text easier to read. And they may choose different color schemes or high contrast operating system settings to view the page. Zoom Text and Magic are the two leading screen magnifiers, and they really provide a number of different tools available to alter the view of what you'd be seeing on the screen to make it easier to read. So testing with the browser, the most important thing you can do there is to magnify the screen to 200%. Most of the time there is no problems when you're magnifying the screen because it's primarily the responsibility or the user agent who is making sure that you can magnify the different elements on the page. The other thing I like to do is disable the style sheets to ensure that the page won't be confusing or misleading when the style sheets are turned off. So that tests for users who may be using an alternative style sheet, in that they will be able to, they're not going to get information that might be confusing or misleading. And we also want to make sure that we've got a visible focus indicator when you're going around and interacting with the screen. When testing with the screen magnifier, there's different settings that are going to be available, and I'm going to go through those in the demo shortly. But there's different options for speech, for web finder, for focus indicators, for cursor enhancements, and you can do different color schemes. These tools do work in Internet Explorer and Firefox on the PC, and ZoomText is also now available on the Mac. So when we're looking at the ZoomText and we're looking at the different features that are available, the things that we want to really concentrate on testing are the different color schemes. We want to magnify the page. We'll want to read the page, so the screen magnifier provides ways to read the page as just like a screen reader, but it doesn't provide all the same information or the amount of information that a screen reader provides. So it doesn't necessarily tell you all of the different types of things. It's more of a text-to-speech where you're reading the content so the user can follow along. Or listen to parts of the content that might be more difficult for them to read. You want to interact with the page, and then you'll also want to check font enhancement. For those of you who have played around with the different font settings and the different magnification, as you magnify the screen with the screen magnifier, you may notice that the text gets very pixelated. When the text gets pixelated, it gets harder to read. So as you continuously increase the font size, you may see that it gets harder and harder to read. Well, the ZoomText and Magic both have font enhancement that will work and will smooth out the fonts. We want to make sure that the fonts that we're using will work with the technology, so that we're not using something that won't enable the font enhancement, because it will make it difficult to read. Most of the time the font enhancement works. There's only been a few cases where I've had fonts that didn't work, but for the most part it works fine. So this video is 12 minutes for those of you who can't see it, and we'll come back and summarize it when it's done.
This is a demo of how to test with a screen magnifier. Today we'll be using ZoomText 10.1 for Windows 8. ZoomText is the leading screen magnifier. Before testing with a screen magnifier, it's a good idea to test with a screen reader like JAWS, Windows, NVDA, or VoiceOver on the Mac. You'll find similar issues with the screen magnifier as with the screen reader when it comes to reading the page. If the reading order is wrong with the screen reader, then it'll also be wrong for the screen magnifier. ZoomText provides functions to magnify the screen, change the color schemes, change the cursor and focus highlights, and provides a number of ways to read the page. To ensure that your product works with the screen magnifier, there are several tests that should be done. First, you'll want to check the different color schemes. The color schemes tested should be the default color schemes that come preset in ZoomText. Users can customize further, but the combinations would be endless, and we want to ensure that the main color schemes work for your product. Look for any items that are difficult to see. Alright, so now let's take a look at this in ZoomText. Under the magnifier tab, there's a number of different settings. One of those is color. That's where you'll find the different color schemes. By default, the normal color scheme is selected. Users also have an option of selecting between invert brightness, reverse video, yellow on black, blue dye, black and white and black. When you go through and test the different color schemes, what you're looking for is to make sure that all of the text is still readable. So let's go ahead and try a few of these different color schemes. First, we'll try invert brightness. Alright, so invert brightness looks fairly good. You can see all of the different colors, all the different links, all of the different content. It's all still very readable. Now let's go and try the next color scheme. So this one is, let's do yellow on black. So yellow on black, it's a little bit harder to tell the difference between the different links, but the text is all still very readable. And so this is also a color scheme that works with this website. Next, you'll want to check cursor and focus enhancements. What you're looking for is to make sure that the focus indicator does not significantly block the content on the page or makes the text unreadable. You should do this test at 2x magnification. All right, let's look at this in Zoom text. Again, underneath the magnifier tab, there is a option for both the different types of cursors and the different types of focus indicators. Typically, I test with the different types of focus indicators, focusing on the color scheme that is red rectangle. Red rectangle is the default that is selected when you start Zoom text. So unless you change it, it'll be set to red rectangle. The other options are thick green underline, yellow block, and thin red rectangle. Typically, the red rectangle is the one that you're going to find has the biggest number of issues because of the different padding and margins set within the web page. We've got the scheme set to red rectangle. Let's magnify the screen and then simply tab through the different pieces of content on the page. Okay, so we've got it up to 2x. I'm going to switch over my focus to the web page, and I'm going to start tabbing through the page. Okay, so as we tapped through, all of the text was still very readable. The thick outline did not block any of the text, so this web page works well with the different focus indicator. Magnification settings can be used to ensure that the page is readable and usable. Magnify the screen to 2x or 3x and look for elements on the page that may be missed or not seen. Also pay attention to the amount of white space on the screen when it is magnified. During a recent reusability study with Zoom text users, we noticed that everyone was missing the content at the bottom of the page, which contained a useful list of links to key pages on the site. The reason it was missed was because there was a lot of white space between the end of the main content and the start of this list. Users thought they were at the bottom of the page, so they did not scroll further. We have it set to 2x. I'm going to magnify this further to 3x. All right, so we've magnified it to 3x. Now, as you can see, the magnification on the screen has significantly reduced the amount of content that is being viewed currently on the page. This is the full screen zoom, and there's a number of different zoom settings that I can use. If you want to switch between the different zoom settings, you can hit Control-Shift-Z in Zoom text. So I'm going to switch over to the website for a minute. And when you're in full zoom mode, I can pan the screen by moving my cursor over, and it's going to move all the way over from one side of the screen to the other. And I can go from left to right or up and down, and it'll scroll through the page as I move my cursor. If I don't like this way of viewing the page, I can go to Control-Shift-Z, and it's going to show the different options. Here, I'm magnifying just part of the screen. And as I move through my cursor around, it's going to show the magnification in that box. I can also have a little magnifying window, so I can actually scroll through, and it's just like a magnifying glass. I can also have the line view, where I'm actually just seeing the horizontal rule. This is really great for reading paragraphs of text. I can also shift and say where the zoom part of the page is, so I can magnify half the screen, and I can have that showing at the bottom, at the top, on the right, and on the left. So there's a number of different options that you can use to magnify the screen. When you're going through, all of the magnification should be seen. As you're going through the different page, you want to make sure that the text is readable, that, things that are going to be on the right-hand side are probably going to be things that a Zoom text user may or may not see because they have to scroll quite far over in order to see it. Several reading modes can be used within the screen magnifier. If you've already tested with a screen reader, you've probably already noticed a lot of the accessibility issues on a page. Doc Reader within Zoom Text is a great tool where you can very quickly see the different issues on a page because it'll write out what it's speaking on the page and you can follow along. Okay, so we've got Zoom Text up on the screen, and if we go over to the Reader tab,
Reader,
we'll have a number of different options. Depending on what type of application you're in, you're going to have different options available. This is where you can turn the speech rate up or down. By default, it's set to 50. And when you're on a web page, you've got the option of reading the content on the page either by setting it to automatically speak as it is now, or you can go and use a tool called Doc Reader. If I select Doc Reader,
Prompter,
it's going to open up a new window, and this is all of the content that's on this web page. And as I go through, I can either say to play, and it's going to highlight the words as it's speaking them, or I can scroll this page and just look for potential issues. So let's go ahead and play it.
Accessible home page before and after demonstration improving a website using web content accessibility guidelines WCAG 2.
Okay, so I've got it reading. I'm just going to scroll down and see if it can identify any issues with this page. So as I'm going through, the content looks pretty readable.
Picture.
All right.
Lack.
All right.
Lack.
So this looks fairly good.
Exit.
Let's go and exit. All right, let's move over to the inaccessible version and go and look at it again with the app reader and see if there's any issues that we see. The first one that we looked at was the accessible page, and it looked fairly good.
Inaccessible
so now
home page.
Let's go contrast that with the inaccessible page.
Zoom Text 10.1.
So again, going to Doc Reader. All right, so now we've got the inaccessible version up. And I'm just going to scroll through the page this time. This time as you're going through, you'll see that there's a number of picture, 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 picture. That means that there's no alternate text for those images. So you can very quickly see that we've got an issue here because we don't have any text alternative. On the accessible page, we had the text version of those, and you didn't see just picture, picture, picture. Just like testing with the keyboard only and with a screen reader, you'll also want to do this with a screen magnifier as well. You usually don't find issues, and if there is, it's usually a bug within Zoom Text that needs to be fixed. Lastly, test the font enhancement settings to ensure that the font selected in your product or site works with font smoothing. In Zoom Text, you can do this by pressing Control-Shift-F. All right, so let's go and look at that within Zoom Text. All right, so here we have Zoom Text at 3 times the magnification. And what we're going to be looking for first is looking at the text, and you want to see the difference in the text and make sure that it's crisp and clean so that when you're looking at it, you can actually read it. So as we go through, it's very easy to see here that we have very crisp and clean text. There's no pixelation that you see around the different letters. If I switch back over to the inaccessible page.
Welcome to City Lights. Inaccessible home page, Internet Explorer.
You can see that the main text, welcome to City Lights. City Lights is a new portal for visitors and residents, is still very clean. But if you look at home, news, tickets, and surveys, that becomes very pixelated because those are no longer text on the page, it's images. The other thing you want to look at is to make sure that that font smoothing is happening. If you don't know whether or not, or you're questioning whether or not font smoothing is working, you can press Control-Shift-F to turn font smoothing off.
Font enhancements disabled.
So now as I've got font smoothing off, you can see that the text, "Welcome to City Lights," and "City Lights is the new portal for visitors and residents," becomes very pixelated and becomes very difficult to read. Let's go ahead and turn it back on just to see the difference.
X font enhancements.
All right, so there we've got X font enhancement back on, and again, it's nice and crisp and clean, and you can read it very easily.
All right, so as we're testing with the screen magnifier, there's a number of different color schemes that are available. There's a lot of different settings as far as magnification of the screen and reading the page and interacting with the different pages on using the different functions that are available. Some of those things that I find useful is actually using Doc Reader. It allows me to quickly identify where there's going to be issues with reading the screen, and also identifies very quickly things that may be interpreted incorrectly. It basically gives you a text version of what is seen on the screen. The other thing to keep in mind is the font enhancement. Looking at that, sometimes you may, font enhancement may automatically turn off. You may need to turn it back on. And I've had some issues when I've tested with Zoom Text where it gets into a mode where it just doesn't work, and then you have to restart it and go back. All right, so for people who are deaf and hard of hearing, this is really where we're looking at any audio and video content. We want to make sure that the audio cues won't be missed, and we're really looking at the quality of the captions for the video. When you have audio-only content, we're looking at transcripts. And so you're looking at both of those two things, depending if you've got video or audio, and making sure that there is sufficient information conveyed, not only just what's spoken, but you want to convey what the speaker names are, any sound effects, and there's a lot of really great practices and documentation on how to write good captions. But you're basically looking at that, making sure that the captions are synchronized with the video and that it is readable and separated by lines in a way that it's going to make it easy to read. For users with mobility impairments, they may be using a number of different tools. On the screen, I have a Switch XS, which is an on-screen keyboard. I've got a picture of different Jelly Bean switches. I've got a sip and puff device, and then I've got the logo of Dragon Naturally Speaking. There is literally thousands of different devices that a person with a mobility impairment can use. Almost all of those will mimic the keyboard input. So the most important thing that you can do when looking at support for people with mobility impairments is making sure that we have keyboard access. And when you do keyboard access, you'll want to make sure you're testing in multiple browsers. And this means that I can interact with every element on the page. So the things that I can do with the mouse, I can do with the keyboard. I also want to make sure that as I'm tabbing through the page and interacting with the different elements, I can see where I am. Mouse users get the cursor, and that tells them where they are. But a keyboard user needs to have a focus indicator. We also want to make sure that we can activate all of the elements on the screen. So just because I can reach it doesn't mean I can actually activate it or do that function that it's supposed to do. I also want to make sure that tab order is logical and that the keyboard is not trapped anywhere, that I can continually go through and interact with it. When I've made sure that the site is keyboard accessible, then I know that I'm going to have a greater likelihood that it's going to work with the other tools, including when I'm testing with Dragon Naturally Speaking. When you're testing with Dragon Naturally Speaking, there's a number of different settings that I've found that makes it easier to interact with web content. So if you're testing with Internet Explorer with Dragon, there's a number of settings to check and uncheck. And these are located also in the checklist that I have available for download. So going through that, you'll want to make sure that those settings are set first, and then you'll want to go and try and interact with Dragon, with speech, and check the different keyboard shortcuts. There's two main things that end up being problems. One is you can't activate an element with speech. So for example, if I have a button on a page and that button visually has the word continue on it, but in the underlying code it's defined as a submit button, then the Dragon user is not going to be able to say, directly call that out as, clicking the submit or the continue button, because the Dragon thinks it's a submit button and the person thinks it's a continue button. So there is a disconnect between what a Dragon user sees versus what the computer thinks it is. And so when we're looking at being able to interact with speech, we're talking about not having Dragon users have to go through multiple steps to interact with that button. Now, if I've got a button and I can't call it out directly, I can say just button or link, and then Dragon will put a number next to each one of those items. And then I can actually say the number of that item, and it'll go ahead and select that item in the list and activate it. But I don't want to have to do those multiple steps. I could also use the mouse grid, and I could go through that, but then I'm having to say a lot more voice commands, and for users who are using Dragon, it can become very voice tiring to have to say all of those different commands. So we're looking at making sure that users can effectively interact with speech. We're also looking at the names of the different buttons. If the name is not pronounceable or you can't select it, then you may want to consider actually changing the naming that you're using on the site. Checking keyboard shortcuts is very important. When Google first came out with Gmail, one of the main problems was that there were single key shortcut keys. And those single shortcut keys interfered when the person was actually dictating a message. So instead of dictating the actual letters that were going to go into the message, the user would actually end up activating all of these different functions and accidentally do things that they didn't mean to do. And so now Gmail has a function where you can actually turn off the shortcut keys, or you can make them two key function keys, which then does not conflict with Dragon naturally speaking. So there are different options there. For users with cognitive impairments, there is such a wide variety of different and varying levels of impairments that are encompassed with this. It could be issues with memory, problem solving, attention, reading, linguistic and verbal comprehension, math comprehension, and visual comprehension. And this is really an area where we need to do so much more research, because there isn't really clear guidelines as far as the things that are really helping users with these issues. There are some general guidelines under the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. There's also a new working group called the Cognitive Task Force that is currently doing more research to really start to understand this area and what can really help users with learning or cognitive impairments. One of the things that we do, especially if we have users and students in the educational institutions, is we'll test with Kurzweil 3000, Read and Write Gold, and Natural Reader, because those are the three tools that we find most of the users are going to be using. And so we want to make sure that the products that they'll be using can work with those three tools. Also, when we find issues within Kurzweil or one of the other tools, we actually do report those to each of the different vendors and work with them to get the product to work well with it. Each of those tools, what they do is they provide a lot of different functions for the different users. And when we're looking at that, it also provides text-to-speech. So just like a screen reader, it does read the speech. So when you're testing with these tools, you can play the web page in an auditory version, and what it's going to do is it's going to track each of the words that it's doing by giving a highlight, and some of them will actually track by sentence as well. So when we're using and looking at overall test strategy for testing with assistive technology, the first thing that we want to do, and the most important thing that you can do, is conformance with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, looking at those success criteria. If in the underlying code we are not meeting the standards, we're not coding to the HTML standards, we're not following the principles and guidelines under the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, we can't expect the assistive technology to interpret the code correctly. We'll also want to make sure that the product is accessibility supported. And then if we can't make it accessibility supported, we need to offer accommodations. So really the first step in accessibility testing is to check compliance against the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. There's a number of free toolbars and favorites. These are tools that are free. You don't have to buy an expensive tool to go through and check to see if you've got technical compliance and if the accessibility information is built in. So for example, on my forms, is the label associated with my form field? It's very easy to check with these tools to see if it is. Also, you can check the alternate text for images, and you can compare and make sure that that alternate text is appropriate for that image. Often when we're doing this, we're starting to test with a screen reader. Testing with a screen reader first is a good test because often the issues that you'll find with a screen reader will be same issues that users who are using other assistive technology are also going to face. The next step is to determine the level of accessibility support needed. So who are your users? What are, what are the browsers that they're using? Most likely you're already doing this for your products. You're already knowing, based on the statistics, what browsers are using. There is no way to tell what browsers are being used based on the assistive technology use. The usage of assistive technology is not something that's tracked by the browser or by any analytics program, so there's no way to say, for the users who are using a screen reader, they're going to be using these browsers, but you can get an idea for the general audience what they are, and then you can look at, the combinations of browsers that are supported by the assistive technology. The third step is to look at start testing the key pages and templates within your application. Look at, what is something that you can do right now. Once you've got the compliance with KEG 2.0, it's technically compliant. You probably will look at, the time that you have to do the testing and see what's going to be the most beneficial for you to do. And often that means you're starting with the key templates. You're starting with the key pages. You're looking at, other ways that you can get feedback from users so that you're not having to do the testing all yourself. Often we can get customer feedback, or we can conduct usability studies with users with disabilities. When you're testing with the assistive technology, it's often good to use users who regularly use the assistive technology or rely on the assistive technology, because you don't want to have issues where you don't know how to use the assistive technology, so you're finding issues that really aren't issues, but it's an issue with you not knowing really how to use it. There are a number of assistive technology checklists that I've created. I've got them for screen readers, screen magnifiers, keyboard testing, Dragon Naturally Speaking, testing for no sound, and text-to-speech. So this is the learning literacy software. And if you go to interactive-accessibility.com/download-assistive-technology-testing-checklists, you will be able to get those checklists and download them. The last thing that I wanted to just really touch on, and this is a big question that everybody often has, is that, okay, that's all well and good. I've tested with the assistive technology. I've identified some issues, but really, what do I do with that? Is it actually a true issue? Where is that issue? What do I do with it? How do I go about fixing it? And the big thing that you need to do is really first identify, is it a problem with the code? Is it something that we're just not compliant with the standards, with the HTML guidelines, with the meeting the KEG 2.0 guidelines? Is it a problem with the assistive technology or the browser? Often when we're trying to find if the problem's with the assistive technology or the browser, we're looking at what the API is passing. So we're actually looking at using tools where we can see the different APIs and what information is being passed. It's also important to note if you do find issues, report them to the browser manufacturer, the assistive technology manufacturer, because the only way that we're going to get things more supported and better is to report these issues and let them know that it is an issue. The other thing that you'll want to do is if it is a browser or an assistive technology issue, you'll want to determine whether or not that issue should be fixed. If it is a WCAG violation, you might want to go ahead and fix that because that's a problem with the code being compliant and you're not following the standards. So we can't expect the assistive technology to work if we're not following standards. The other thing is we always have to consider that if it is a browser bug or an assistive technology bug, there might be some things that we can do in the underlying code to make it better. But if we are fixing these issues, we may break it in other assistive technology, and we may not have future support for the assistive technology once that problem gets fixed, either in the browser or in the assistive technology. So this really is something that you should consider on a case-by-case basis, looking at really what the severity of that issue is. Is it going to block complete access for a user with a disability? Is it going to make things just more difficult to use overall? So in conclusion, we're really looking at making sure that we're defining what accessibility support means for each product. Look at what assistive technology, what browsers you want to target. Always start by following the WCAG 2.0 guidelines. Start small. Start with testing with a screen reader. Start testing with one screen reader. That little amount of testing can make a huge difference in the overall level of accessibility of your product. Always provide a way for users to submit feedback and offer accommodations when there is offer accommodations for inaccessible content or an alternate way for users to get it. All right, so we have about 5 minutes left in this session, and I did want to open it up for questions. I also want to note that if you do have questions about assistive technology testing, feel free to reach out to me. My email is Kathy, so KATHYW, at ia11y.com. And then my phone number is also 978-443-0798. We'd love to hear from you. All right, so Sharon, I'll turn it over to you. I'm not sure if there was questions that we should be answering that haven't been answered, or if people have additional questions.
Kathy, I'm seeing 2 new questions that you haven't addressed yet, one from Beth and one from Juan. So while we're waiting for others to enter their questions or comments in the chat area, if you can address those 2, that would be great.
Great. I see the one for Beth. So Beth said, for new testers, how much time do people allot for AT testing or training before they can effectively test applications? Typically what I'm doing with new testers is I start them small. So I start testing very specific things and get them used to knowing how the assistive technology works for a particular area. So I'll have them read the page and identify any content, for example, that is read by the screen reader that you can't see on the screen, and now analyze whether or not that is something that is good, so that they get to learn how the screen reader is listening to things, how it's announcing things, what things it's saying, what things it's not saying, and also starting them on really comparing an accessible version versus an inaccessible version so you know what it is. As far as how much time for AT training, it really depends how much the person can do on their own. A lot of it is, exploring the, how to use it, practicing, and so as well as training and learning how to use it. Typically what we'll do is a training session. We'll usually have an all-day or 2-day training session and walk them through it. It's also useful to watch users who use assistive technology and how they use it. So watching some usability studies is one of the better ways to learn just how users with disabilities interact with content and how you should be testing with assistive technology. So it depends on the person. It also depends on the application, on what and how complex it is. If it's a website that has text and doesn't have very many functions versus an application which has a lot of rich internet controls, it can be a lot harder to do the testing for that. One had a question, can we use assistive technology for users with cognitive disabilities to test accessibility issues that this audience may experience? I do testing with Kurzweil, Read and Write Gold, and Natural Reader. And some of the big things that I find when I'm testing with that is that often I'll have content that I don't expect to be read that actually does get read. For example, I was testing with one of the products, and I had a bunch of JavaScript being read in the middle of a website. And the reason it was reading that JavaScript was because I had inline JavaScript. It wasn't a separate file. And that JavaScript was then read by the tool. Now, that wasn't a problem. It shouldn't have been read. You can do inline JavaScript, but we ended up pulling that JavaScript out and putting it into a separate file, so it called it instead of having it inline into the system, and then we reported it back. So looking at testing with users with cognitive disabilities and looking at the different tools, you can test with the tools that are Kurzweil and Read and Write Gold and Natural Reader, but there's so many different tools that users may be using, and it could be simple things as using a spell check or some other tools. So it's really hard to really get a good idea of what's going to work and what the issues are. But testing with those major tools that are frequently used, especially if you're in education, those are Kurzweil and Read and Write Gold are a couple of the tools, and Natural Reader, because it's free, are frequently used. So knowing what your users are using and then testing with those.
Well, Kathy, we're actually out of time. So first, I want to thank you for doing such a great job. You've really imparted a lot of information in this hour and a half. So thank you so much for doing this webinar for us. And I also want to thank our captionist, Brooke, who also has done a great job keeping up with all of this information. So Brooke, thank you. Great job. And with that, I want to just highlight, I have put up on the screen, there is a link on this slide which will take you to the feedback survey. We really appreciate everyone filling out these feedback survey forms after each webinar because we really pay attention to your input. And I also want to highlight that we have 3 great new webinars coming up. On October 8th, we have web components and accessibility. And then on November 19th, we have accessible web graphics with SVG and Canvas. And then on December 9th, we have HTML5 and ARIA for meeting WCAG 2.0 success criteria. So, and then in the near future, probably in the November, December timeframe, we'll be posting our webinar series for 2015. So keep an eye on our website for that. And I do see one question. Ava asked, can you get a copy of the presentation via email? And so the answer is yes, Ava, I will send that to you. There is a link that everyone received in their confirmation emails that takes you to the web page where you can download the PDF, but I will send the PDF to you. So with that, I think we've covered everything. So again, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today, and thank you to Kathy for doing such a great job. To log out of the webinar today, all you need to do is just close Adobe Connect and hang up the phone if you're connected via the phone, and that will take you out of the webinar. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I hope to see you on a future IAAP webinar. So thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon.